Okay, so in our recent video or in our recent lesson, we spoke about HTML as a front-end language. And we said that HTML was a markup language and not a programming language. This is because HTML cannot handle any logic. And it's a front-end language because HTML is interpreted by your browser, just as CSS and JavaScript. And we said that browsers, languages that are spit directly into the browser without any interpretation from the server are front-end languages. We also spoke of some back-end languages such as PHP, SQL, Python, Ruby, and the like. And we said that those languages are interpreted by the server. Okay. So if you run those languages, you need a server. We call them server-side languages or back-end languages. Today we'll talk about the latest release of HTML, which is HTML5. And it's worth mentioning that there's been several releases before HTML5. There's HTML5 is like the fifth and the latest major version of HTML. And every version for a language from time to time is updated because sometimes there are things that get deprecated along the way. That is, users may complain of challenges. And so they try to bring a more advanced version that meets technological code better. So every day there's an advancement of technology in AI, there's an advancement of technology in the hardware involved. So the language also evolves to meet the current needs. Now, currently we are on HTML5, and HTML5 was released in 2014. Okay, it was released in 2014. The purpose of releasing HTML5 was to make to have tags more semantic. That is, tags that make sense to the user and the browser as well. So if we see the tags make sense to the browser, it means that search engines are optimized to interpret the tags very well. And also machine readers like screen readers and other things are also equipped to understand these tags. And they are also user-friendly because for developers, and the tags make sense. So there are tags as we go along, you encounter and you understand what we are talking about. And so I said HTML5 is the latest release. Before HTML5, the first release was HTML 2.0, which was released in 1995. The second one was HTML 3.2, which was released in 1997. The third one was HTML 4.01, which was released in 99. And then it followed with XHTML. Now, XHTML tried to degrade what we call XML as well. XML is extensible markup language. It's also a markup language, and the documentation for them were released as well. In 2000, the 1.0 version was released, and in 2001, another update was also released. Now, in our earlier, today we'll use Sublime Text. In our earlier examples, we spoke about an IDE or a coding tool which you can use. I want to use Sublime Text for our example today. Let me kind of take this off. Once we start the Sublime Text, I told you that with the first thing, it's your HTML declaration. The first line is your declaration. So as we can see here, doc type HTML is our declaration. And this is the declaration for HTML5. And let's look a little into it. I just want to indent things a little so that I get a better view of it. But let's take a look at what doc type HTML is. It declares the document as an HTML5 document. And there are several versions of HTML documents. So you can be playing within HTML 4.0. You can be playing, as we saw in our earlier, you can say, okay, well, I want to write my code that adheres to the 4.01 standard. Okay. And in doing that, you have to place this doc type there. So if I want to play within 4.101, it means that my doc type declaration has to be this. Okay. That is what I'm going to declare as my doc type for the HTML. The doc type kind of it tells the browser what standards to use for the interpretation of your code. Okay. And depending on the level of advancement of your doc type, the browser will choose certain tags and understand certain tags. But you can see this is a very long HTML public, a quotation mark opens, you have a dash, then W3 standards, then you have HTML 4.01 English and HTTP w3.org translation, the strict document. Now, the document is found here. This, so if we get into our browser, let's get into our browser and see this. So in doing that, I'm trying to say, well, this is a standard I'm using. So when I open, this is the standard that is adhering to. Okay, the typical usage is this, that, URL is this. So as you can see, there is a lot of, so that's where we find the documentation. And it says that refer to this document as the basis for my development. So when you do that, that's what you are telling the browser that refer to this document as the basis of my code. Okay, so things become right or things become wrong based on what you write. However, in the previous years, as you can see, all of these doc types, they are very lengthy. 2.0's on, 3.2's on, 4.01's on is even lengthier, and XHTML's are even far lengthier. HTML5, which was released in 2014, had a doc type. It was very simplified. So we say that HTML5 uses a more lenient doc type for syntax parsing, and it's easy to remember. These ones are not easy to remember. Okay, these ones are not easy to remember. Actually, when I started programming, I was fortunate to code using these doc types, this doc type, and it's not easy to remember. So what we do is we sometimes copy it on our pasteboard, and after we are done with writing our HTML tags and HTML code, then finally we come and paste the doc type as the first line, which was very inconvenient. Now it's easier to remember. So once you start your programming, you can just type this, and then you hit your doc type in caps, doc type, and then you say HTML. And you are good to go. Right. So it makes it very convenient to declare doc types. That's for HTML5, actually. And let's continue. So it came with a very simplified doc type syntax. Okay. Now there have been new semantics that have been introduced, semantic elements. Semantics, when we talk about semantic tags or semantic elements, like I said, there are elements that make sense to machine readers, they make sense to the browser, and they also make sense to the developer. So now you can see tags that have been. So I said over here that HTML5 semantics that better describe the structure of a web page, improving readability for both developers and search engines. Search engines are part of the machines that we are talking about, and they are machine devices like screen readers and machine readers itself. So you can have a header and a footer. These are tags that you have a navigation, you have an article. Inside the article, you have a section, you can have an aside, and you can have a main. So let's see how that's placed in an HTML document. All of these tags go into the body of the HTML document. So in your HTML document, you can have a main. Then inside your main, you can have at the top level, you can have a navigation. Then that's where your navigation resides. So you can have a logo in here. inside your navigation, let's say a logo called IMG source, and then I say I have an image, certain image file called flower1.jpg. That's what I want, and I want a width of, let's say, a width of 250 pixels and a height of 250 pixels. And some of these things, for demo purposes, we would just use them. And then it moves to, so this actually becomes our header. We go into our header. Then our navigation will sit in our header. So we have a nav here. Now we have the list of items, the menu items that we want to do. We can have a navigation in there. Then the next thing we go to is an article. An article kind of begins. Then you inside your article, you can have a header, you can have a section. And each section can have a heading, let's say H3 tag, which says that welcome to my site. That's the heading. And you can have some paragraph in here, which says that P tag paragraph, which says, let's say, you want 3 lines of lorem text. Want some lorem text. So now we have some 3 lines of lorem text. And here, if I'm trying to save it so that we can, so I'll save it in an experiment folder, and I'll call this, because we are doing HTML5, I'll call this HTML5 for HTML5 demo purposes. Okay. And then if we come into our folders, our finder, and then say, okay, we are going into our experiment, our classes, and we have a document, should have a document HTML5 here. When I open it with our browser, Firefox, now we see that document open. So this is where we are going to work from today. As you can see, the website we created is sitting there. That's our logo, which is quite large. Welcome to our site. The navigation, we haven't placed any items there, so you can have an unordered list of items, list item, and then inside the list item, you can have a tag. So your list. Let's close the list item here, and let's close the li here. So for just for demonstration purposes, that's why I'm trying to create this structure. So we are going to have 3 of these, which says that home, about, is about our website, contact us. So these 3 items are there. Now, since this is not a CSS class, we are just dealing with HTML. So HTML will just display the structure of these things. But when we go into a CSS class, we can style it further. Okay. Let's do a quick CSS for this. So we come into this side and say we want to view this syntax as a CSS file. And I want to say for my UL LIs, list style should be none, and they should display inline. Okay. Now, when I come to this side, let's look at initially how they seem. So this is my CSS. I can go to I can name it as maybe the CSS is for HTML5. So let me put here HTML5.css. And inside the experiments folder, I want to put it in my styles. Okay, and save this in my styles. Now, before the CSS, I haven't linked it yet. So it's not going to show. So for my website, today I'll call it HTML5. And I will implement a link tag that helps me implement my CSS. So styles.html5.css. Okay. So when I come back and run this, now I've linked it. HTML5.css, HTML5.css line. So let's go into my now. All right. So when I come back and I refresh, I should be seeing some changes. Okay. Actually, this is not a CSS class. So we won't go too deeply into CSS. So I can say, okay, give me some margin or padding right or padding in general should be 50 pixels or yeah, okay. So padding, my paddings, I want a padding of 30 pixels around each of them. And then I come back to refresh. And now it's looking more like a menu. And we can style this further. We can style this further for it to look more like a menu. I can say float right. No, not this. I can say I want my nav to float right. And we have something like this. And I can reduce the size of my logo just a little to favor us. So we say, okay, make it 100 by 100. And then now we seem to be getting somewhere. Okay. We seem to be getting somewhere. And these are how, so you have your logo file inside, as you can see, your logo file inside your header, right? And your navigation items to inside your header. And you can set the navigation, okay, when I click on the home, take me to google.com. And when I search that and I refresh and I hit, when I can also set that, okay, it should target blank, it should set the target attribute to blank, which means that it should open it in a new tab whenever we click that. So once I come and click home, a new tab opens that sends me to google.com. So these are links, and gradually you can add more code to it to help you build a website or to complete a website. So now you have an article, you have a section, and you can have an aside. We call this aside. Aside is like a sidebar which contains some items. Okay? And you can style your aside as well so that it sits on the left or on the right. So you can have some content there as well. Say some short paragraph like this for your aside. Let's copy what's here. Short paragraph will aside. And include the paragraph. Okay. So once that is done, you have now created an aside, and then you can have a footer. Okay, footer, which says that 2025. So now I have a website, I have a footer. The S copy is the short form for like the copyright symbol. Okay. Some of these things you we will get to. So that's my footer actually. And I haven't added any color, so you don't see anything, any distinguishing factor there. I can say my footer should be black or the text on the footer should be black. So that can be done over here. Now, if you have semantic tags, the thing is, whilst you color white and the background color should be black. Now, like I said, this is CSS. Our purpose is to focus on HTML. Okay, but I wanted to, and so now we have a website, we have a header which contains our logo and our navigation. We have this sitting here section, and you can have several sections in your articles. Okay, and you have an aside. A sidebar can be styled so that it stands on the side. Okay. So all of these things can be done. We can say, and all of these things, but that's not the main purpose of our class today. I wanted to introduce HTML5 semantic tags. Semantic tags are tags that make sense to a header, the main. So the main is here, and you have a footer. The main document is here, and you have a footer outside. So that's the main, that's a footer. Okay. And all of these tags kind of make sense. There is a header, there is a navigation, there is an article, there is a section. All of these are designed to make sense to the developer. So when he sees it, he sees, okay, that's my header, that's my navigation, that's this. And apart from the developer, it also makes sense to the devices that use some of these implementations. Okay. Um, the objective is not to type or to code HTML5 today. The objective is to introduce certain tags that came with HTML5 that made them very useful. So we'll get back into, so we call them semantic tags, okay? So we saw an example of how the header can be implemented, the footer can be implemented, the navigation can be implemented, the 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 article can be implemented. And we saw how a section can be implemented and an aside and a main can be implemented. Okay. Um, so let's go on. We've seen a main, we've seen an aside. I said aside is for sidebars. Okay. Sections are for thematic grouping of content. Articles represent an independent content like a blog post. Navigation, we have nav. So these were semantic elements that came with HTML5. Other versions of HTML did not have these. Okay? And it made it more useful for search engines as well. So a search engine can look at the page and know, okay, what are the navigations you have and index them so that when the person types Google, now on the home page, let me show you an example. Like let's say I want to go to I go to google.com and I type maybe a website like University of Ghana. Okay. And when the search engine opens, as you can see, it's giving me things like program catalog. graduate admissions, undergraduate self-help. All of these things are linked navigations that are in the domain, right? And this is how the search engine captures it from the nav bars, okay, from the nav bars, and then tells which ones are. So when we go there, definitely we'll see things like admissions, we'll see things like program graduate admission. Let's go to University of Ghana homepage. As you can see, admissions is here. There are several of them. Okay, so they are inside the admissions. You have undergraduate admissions, international admissions. All of them kind of show up here. Okay, and that's how the search engines work. They capture it from your code that you've written. Now it's able to read the code and understand the code and index accordingly. Okay, so we will, one of the blessings which came with it is like the semantic tags that came with that. Let's look at multimedia support. In the earlier versions of HTML, which I had the privilege of writing, there was for you to be able to render a video or to play a video on a website, there were plugins you needed to install on your server. Okay. So Adobe had a plugin we call Flash, a Flash Player, Adobe Flash Player. And once you install that on your website, now your users can play, but they need that plugin. You need that plugin working from your server to play your videos on the server. Okay. With HTML, it came with a multimedia support such that you could embed videos, you could embed audios, you could embed canvas, you could embed an SVG just using um, tags, simply implementing tags. And we'll go through how that is done. SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. And there are two types of graphics. There are raster graphics and there are scalable graphics. Okay, vector graphics. Okay, raster graphics and vector graphics. Now, the vector graphics, when you stretch them, they do not pixelate or they do not distort in quality. But with the raster, with the with the vector graphics, when you stretch them, they do not distort in quality. But with the raster graphics, when you do, they distort in quality. But the vector graphics relatively have a very higher resolution compared to the raster graphics, and we'll get to all of that. Sometimes you implement a logo on a website and you don't want it pixelated, you don't want to reduce the quality. So you use an SVG to implement that. Now, let's look at how we can implement an audio in our website. Okay. So there is a section, we have one section here, and we want to implement an audio. I've set up an audio file in a folder. Okay, so let's go look at the audio file sitting there. So these are my media files. I have an audio file, oj.mp3. I have a video file, toys.mp4. Now we'll take a look at how they work. So let's start with the audio. The audio, since it's a tag, so now we don't need Flash to really play audio and video. With just a simple tag, the browser is able, the audio tag is able to, you have the audio and then you specify there's a self-closing tag called source. It allows you to specify the source of the, the, uh, the, the media. So you have media, I've specified my source as media, and then my file name is oj.mp3. It's an mp3 file, it's an audio file. So I come here in the type, I state audio mp3 at the type. Now let's see what happens with this. When I save this and I get back into our browser, I get back into our refresh. Okay, so the audio, so we need to add a few things, okay? Like let's say controls. The source, okay. So now we have some controls in there. Okay. The control allows us to play the audio. So this is the audio we are currently seeing. I can see over here, I can see also by OG. And when I refresh, this doesn't show. Okay. It looks like when I refresh, this doesn't show. But if my audio file didn't show up, this text will show. The Koso by OJ will show. Okay. And okay. So I want us to see it more clearer. Okay, so we have an audio file here, and there is a browser. Once we hit play, as you can see, it's playing the audio file. So that's how we integrate audio files nowadays. Um, with this, you can integrate, and you don't need a flash. You don't need to install any plugin on your server. Just with the audio tag, you can do that. And let's look at an example of a video tag, how we can. And apart from this, you can have autoplay. Autoplay means that automatically play. You can have loop as an attribute. All of these are attributes for audio. Okay. And once I add this, loop means that play it over and over again. Okay. Once I add this and save, when I refresh on my website, I get to the final end. Let's see what happens. 5, 6, 5, 7, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11. It starts again. It means that it's looping. Okay. And it's automatically playing. These are attributes you can add to your audio files. Okay. Now let's look at an implementation of a video file. Now we have the video tag, which allows you to do that. And with that, also you implement the source of your video. So with the source, you have media, you can have media, and the source of the video I want to use is toys. Toys dot. Remember, when you are specifying, you need to add the extension as well. Toys, the file name and the extension. Toys.mp4. It's an MP4 format video. It's an MP4 format video. And the type, you say video, and you can add MP4 here. Okay. Now, just as we see, this is what it states. We can go down, and then now it's implementing our video. See, it looks like it's implementing the size of the video wholly. That's actually not width one, or straight the page. So what I can do is I can specify the width of the video and say the video's width should be 80% of my width or 80% of my page. Or let me make it even 50% of my page. And I won't specify any height because the height is not important. And I can go specify control. Look at this. If I should implement this, now the video comes, it doesn't have any controls at all, right? So I need to add the attribute controls. And now when I refresh, now my video has controls which I can use to play the video. Animals end up in landfill every single year. And I can add things like autoplay, to burn and rot, along with the memories and stuff. So autoplay,
That's why when I found this out, I basically turned my whole life upside down to create a real life Toy Story.
So it means that when it's
I
done,
built a
play
business
again.
which is a soft toy
Keep
adoption
looking.
agency,
Okay, so
one which
these
allows us
are
to
ways
close the
which you
loop,
can
reuse
implement
millions of
video.
perfectly good.
Okay, now we have, and as you can see, it can set it outside the device. All of these are features in the browser. However, it's made possible because you can implement videos and audios directly without needing uh, plugin installed on your server. At first, in the previous versions of HTML, that wasn't possible. You need a server installed, and the Flash tool can be slow sometimes, and it becomes heavy to download and all of that. But now things have changed, thanks to. So now let's talk about Canvas and SVG. Canvas and SVG. The first two we spoke about earlier, audio and video, are mainly used for multimedia. Okay, so for audio files, for video files, at first you needed a plugin to do that. Now you don't need that in HTML5, and it makes it fast to load. You don't need to install a plugin which needs to run a script, which can sometimes slow down your website when a lot of people are using the website. Um, it solves a lot of problems. Now let's talk about Canvas and SVG. Canvas is like a graphics platform and SVG as well. What happens is you can draw now in HTML5 using JavaScript or any script, whether PHP or any script, but mainly Canvas is for JavaScript. Okay. This class does not focus on, or this lesson does not focus on JavaScript. We want to dwell on HTML, but it's important to make mention that, hey, there is Canvas in HTML5, which you can use to draw. So we'll demo that. So basically, you use, so if you have a canvas, you have a set of tags, like a canvas tag. You have a set of tags, like a canvas tags, which you can use for um, drawing. So this is what happens. Your canvas tags will take certain properties, okay, like the width of the canvas and the height of the canvas. Now, if you've used any program like Photoshop or Illustrator or any graphic designing tool, what happens is when you are creating a new file, it allows you to specify the dimensions of the file. Okay, so you specify the width and the height. More like a graphic design tool, this canvas serves as like a new platform which you are about to draw on. Okay, or a new layer which you are about to draw on. So when you specify the width to be 200, what you are saying is you want a canvas of dimension with the width being 200 and the height being 200 pixel. So with this, I have specified that, okay, I want a canvas to do something, right? Now I need to draw on the canvas, okay? I need to draw on a canvas. And to be able to link my canvas to the JavaScript file, I need to give it an ID. We will come to understand what we mean by IDs in CSS. Okay, an ID is more like a selector, okay, which allows you to target a specific thing. And when we come into JavaScript, you see how the ID works there. So maybe I'll give it an ID of my canvas. And now this is a canvas waiting to be drawn on. Or this is, let's say, a new layer waiting to be drawn on. Okay. So that's how we design canvases. In the meantime, when I go to my, let's say I've saved this, when I go to my browser where we were demoing the video and the audio tags, when I go there, it seems like nothing is happening. Even though I've inserted a canvas that needs the video, it seems like nothing is happening. But when we add some script, okay, we add some script some JavaScript that draws the object. We will see some manifestations over there. Okay. So that's about Canvas. So for the purposes of our demo, I'll add some script here. This is JavaScript. Okay. That's JavaScript. And it's intended to draw on that canvas we just built. That canvas of size, dimensions, 200 pixel width and 200 pixel height. It's supposed to draw over there. Now, this is what is happening. I can decide to take this out, and I want us to just see the manifestation. Now you can see that this is showing something like const canvas. This one stands for a constant in JavaScript. We won't go into JavaScript, but I just wanted to give you an overview. Document dot get elements by ID. This object targets our ID, which we specified here. So we targeted, we said ID is called my canvas. So get element by ID means grab the element which has the ID in my canvas. Okay, that's what this means. Grab the element that has the ID. So it's going to grab this canvas, right? And do something with that canvas. Set another constant and now say canvas.get context 2D. So we are going to draw in a 2D on a canvas. And this is what draws the triangle. Fill style as red, fill rectangle here. So basically you are drawing a red rectangle. And when we add this to our script and we go back to our page, we expect the canvas to appear right beneath the video file we have here. And there we have the canvas appearing. Because we set the width to 50%, it's floating and kind of allowing it to float by it. We can decide to say, okay, the width of our video should be 100% so that it's kind of gets in the way of it. So now we have a width of 100% and then our canvas appears here. Okay, our canvas appears here. So that is a demonstration of canvases. Okay, you can also, so this is a script drawing on the screen. It's not an image. It's not a red image. If I come here and say save image as, you see nothing happens when I click save image as, because actually it is not an image. It is a canvas. Okay, it's a canvas. And that is one way of drawing with HTML5. HTML5 allows you to draw using pixels, using scripts. Okay, since this is not an image, it will load faster. It's code. So you don't need a lot of time to wait for the image. And the resolution is very high, irrespective of the level of zoom you give to it. So that's one blessing which came to HTML5. Has to do with Canvas. Let's try to write a script here. So we are saying that the constant CTX should now take a font attribute. Okay, in JavaScript, that's what we take. We take an object of font and it should write 20 pixel Arial and it should give us this text. Okay, it should give us this text. So fill the text with this color. Fill text is going to fill by the color we specified here. Okay. So let's continue here, and when we have that, we have a new canvas here. Remember, it looks like an image, but it's not an image. It's a canvas that is being drawn, and this is JavaScript. This is purely code. That's what HTML5 allows you to do. It allows you to kind of let's say draw on your screen using scripts. Okay, so that's one blessing that canvases came with. Okay, so when you see canvas anywhere, remember that there's a tag called canvas. You can use it to draw script. And remember, in between those tags, there's no content. Okay, there's no content. There's no content written. That's an illustration of a canvas, and you can animate. You can do a lot of things that make them change motion using your JavaScript. So that's the blessing of using canvases. Okay. Now let's talk about SVGs. SVGs simply means scalable vector graphics. Okay. And there are two types of graphics. There is raster graphics and there is vector graphics. Raster graphics are often made of they pixelate when you stretch them. When you stretch the image quality, you have the quality losing out. When you stretch maybe a vector graphic or when you expand a vector graphic, it doesn't reduce in quality. So that's the difference between the raster and the vector graphics. You don't have any quality losses when you decide to create out an image that is vector. Okay. In HTML5 allows you to implement vector graphics, and we'll come to see that in a few minutes. The beauty of using scalable vector graphics is that now you can have logos or you can have icons who do not change in quality when the user zooms in. Okay. So whenever the user zooms in, because they are vector graphics, they do not change in quality. And it is not, let's say, it's not written using, it's not like an image. It's code that is implemented by HTML5. So the user cannot see that image and go and use it elsewhere. It's code. It can only be interpreted by the browser. So it's important. Now let's come in here and then demonstrate how SVGs are implemented. Initially, we did Canvas. Just as Canvas, we said Canvas has a tag. We specified the width and the height of the canvas, okay, as attributes of the canvas. So we said a width of something and a height of something, okay. And we explained that we consider the width and the height dimensions like creating a new layer in Photoshop or in Illustrator. That layer is what you are going to build on, or that area kind of sets the boundaries within which your canvas will live. Okay, so if you set the height of 20 pixels, it's going to live within a height of 20. You set a height of a width of 20 pixels, it's going to live within a width of 20 pixels. If set it to a height of 50 pixels, it's going to live within the height of 50 pixels. That's how it works. SVG is also similar. So let's have SVG tags here, opening and closing tags. However, with SVG, you can specify the type of object you want. Okay. For purpose of demonstration, let's specify maybe a circle. Now, this object you specify is more like a self-closing tag. Okay, so a circle, the self-closing tag. In HTML5, we barely bring this as a self-closing tag, but we can decide to bring it. So I can write circle and then give it some attributes. But first, let's give some attributes to SVG. Okay, the SVG width and height specifies the boundaries within which your SVG activity will live. Okay, so let's give it a width of 200 and a height of 200 pixels. Okay, then we come and specify the attributes of the circle. We say there is an attribute called CX, which kind of specifies the height of, or it kind of specifies X is for horizontal dimension. Okay, so it kind of specifies the distance from your boundary. So let's say if you have a boundary starting over here, let's say you have a boundary starting over here, Xpixel says that if I specify this to 100, it says that measure 100 from this boundary, measure 100 pixels from the, and start drawing my circle horizontally. And you specify that for the y dimension, which is a vertical dimension as well. So you specify that as 100 as well. And a circle has a radius. So what CY means is that now vertically from my top boundary or from my top layer, top boundary, from my the boundary of my top layer, measure about 100 pixels downwards and start drawing my circle. And of course, it has a radius. So we are going to specify some radius for it. We are going to say, okay, this circle should have a radius of 40 pixels. Okay. And when we look at it, it looks like nothing is happening. But of course, it's been drawn. Okay. The default color is black. It's going to draw it with the color of black. But if you want it in another color, you can say fill it with the color of purple. So now we have a circle drawn that is filled with the color of purple. Remember, all of this is code. It's not an image. And so it loads very fast. That's one of the blessings HTML5 came with. The SVG files allows you to kind of draw things on the screen with the canvas as well. It allows you to draw things. The canvas you can use for more animations and other things. Okay. The SVG you can implement and use it to draw stuff on the screen. Apart from that, you can also add some interactivity to it. Okay. And we'll come to that. I'll just demo how you can add some interactivity to it. It's not, but you need JavaScript. And this class is not for JavaScript, it's for HTML, the structure. I just want to demo this. So let's say for our JavaScript, we have a script tag which lives here. And we say the script is JavaScript. If you simply write script by default, HTML will pick it up as a JavaScript. Okay, so it will run it as a script. Now we have a circle drawn here, which is not an image. The blessings of this circle is that because it's not an image, if you right click, you can't see it. Okay, so this is useful for logos on website. Sometimes a logo can be saved in the form of an SVG code, which allows the users not to be able to download the image. Okay, and I'll illustrate that, but sometime soon. I want us to write a quick function called change color because I want us to change the color of this whenever some sort of activity is done. So in JavaScript, when you're writing a function, begin with the keyword function and then the name of your function, change color, and you set the parameters which that function is going to take. We are going to say you shouldn't take any parameters at all. Okay. And we are going to say it should get element or it should grab the HTML element by a certain ID. Now we'll come to understand what IDs are. IDs are attributes that are more like selectors in CSS. They allow you to select or grab a specific element. Okay. So let's say we can call this circle our favorite circle. Favorite circle. And this is the ID we've given to it. So in our JavaScript, we can come here and then specify that grab this element which has the ID favorite circle. Okay. So putting an ID in your HTML tags allow you to do things with it in JavaScript. Okay. Then when you come here, you come and say set attribute to, I'll say set attribute. I'll use the set attribute function and then set a new attribute to that particular element. Okay, so I want to say it should set the attribute fill. It should set the attribute fill to the color orange. Okay, the color orange. And when I click here, let's see what happens. Nothing is going to, even though I've written the script, nothing is going to happen here because I haven't given it instruction in terms of behavior when that should happen. Okay, when that should happen. Even though I've written some code that change color, get elements by ID, that is grab this ID favorite circle, and then sets the attribute fill to orange. Fill is currently set to purple. When I refresh this, nothing seems to happen. Nothing seems to happen. But when I come to add the attribute on click here, on click, which is an attribute for calling interactivity or calling JavaScript functions or stuff when it's clicked. So I'm saying that, okay, well, when the user now clicks this, sets this behavior in motion. So when the user now clicks that change color, implements this function. So I'm going to write change color and this, right? So when I save this, now when the user comes to, when I refresh this, when the user comes to click this, I expect things to change around. Okay. Let's look at what is happening here. Our circle is well drawn. Change color function has been um, gotten right. The fill is set to color orange. And I'm telling the script that when it does that, change color. Okay. Change color. So that's my function written out. Get elements by ID, specifying. So I need to target the document. Okay, document and get element by ID. When I come to this site now, I've refreshed the entire thing. When I click now, it's changing color. Okay, so that's how you can add some interactivity. Remember, all of this all of this doesn't happen, that interactivity doesn't happen with our SVG code if it doesn't happen if we don't have scripts. So scripts allow us to add some interactivity to it. Even though it looks like an image, we can write some code to change its behavior. And that's the blessings for HTML5. It's not just a static image, right? It's an image that is implemented, this cycle is implemented by code. And you can use that for logos. You can use that to animate other things. Okay. And just for example purposes, I'll do how maybe we fetch a logo, right, in Illustrator. Let me see if I have some old logos which I built in the past. In the past, because of the work, sometimes I did some graphic design as well. Um, so let me go into my documents and say projects, see brand design. Okay. So I have some logos in here, right? Sample.ai. I want to use for illustrative purposes, just to use this. So I'm opening this with my Adobe Illustrator, which is a graphics design. So at first, initially, before HTML5, if you want to draw anything, you have to implement anything, you need an image. So you have to go into your graphic design tool and then implement that and ensure that you have an image file, maybe a JPEG or you have an image file, let's say a JPEG or uh, okay, so this is I think a logo I did some time back. I can decide to say I have this file drawn out, right? I can decide to say save as. SVG. Okay, as you can see, SVG is an option here. Once I choose to save as SVG, it's asking me for the type of SVG, and I can come here and then grab the SVG code. When I click, it has generated the code for the SVG for me, what I need to implement to see my SVG running. But this is a very complex SVG because it has a lot going on in there because it's not a simple image file. Okay. However, if I implement this, I will see my SVG code. So I can simply grab this. As you can see, this has even styles here, which I need to add up. And the styles are for the colors and stuff. The grids are for the rectangle and stuff. So let's come here and then simply say, hey, we want to implement this. And just for purpose of demo, I'm going to paste all of this. You know, styles are supposed to be in your header, but just for purpose of demo, I'm going to paste all of this here. And then let's see what happens here. Oops. So we have this code rendering this. So it is not an image. If you see this, as you can see, now the work for my Illustrator is done. I'll quit my Illustrator so that we can have the code wrapped. Don't say. I'll quit my Illustrator so that now we've pasted all of that we fetched here from our SVG code here. You see, it's even though this shows it is not an image, so I can't even select it. I can't save it as well. Okay, I can't save it because it is not an image. It doesn't give me the option. It has save page as. It doesn't allow me to save the image. So that's one of the blessings with SVGs. You can have a logo in your website that allows you to just fetch the file and it's in your header or it's in your navigation and you can even control the dimensions of the SVG. Okay. You can control the dimensions of the SVG in there. So I'll say that one of the blessings HTML5 came with is the ability to control images or render images in the form of SVGs. So this is our first SVG file. As you can see, we are setting a bounding border. You start over here. Okay. And the view box is 960 by 960. Okay. 960 by 960. You can decide to say this view box should be 400 by 400 and then 400. Well, SVG code deals a lot in numbers. So sometimes if you tweak the numbers and you are not careful, so now we have this stack 400 by 400. It's getting out of the way. It's getting the real. So if you want to illustrate some of these things, you need to really get into the numbers very well. So that's a little about SVGs, which we can implement. Now, when we go back and refresh our page, we have this SVG file, which I picked from Illustrator. Okay, so you can have your logo designed in Illustrator, then you can go and fetch the SVG code and then implement it on your website. Okay, and nobody is able to see the image. So that's one of the blessings SVGs came with HTML5. Scalable vector graphics allows you to draw graphics with code. And sometimes you can, as we saw, you can add animations, you can add behaviors to that logo or that image when it's clicked. And because it's code, it runs faster or it loads faster compared to an image, okay, of a certain dimension. All right, so let's look at forms. What HTML5 brought to us. We've implemented examples of SVG code, audio stuff. We want to clear our screen a little and then now look at forms. Okay. So if you want to write a form in HTML, generally, if you want to implement a form in HTML, there are some attributes or there are some tags which you need to implement first. The first thing is you have your form tag. Okay, your form tag, opening and closing should be there, and it should have some attributes. So your action is where your form gets to, maybe submit.php is the page you are asking the form to submit to when it's done or when you click the submit button. And the method is how you want your data submitted. Okay. We'll get into all of that when we get into the body tags very well. So this time we want to show posts. Okay. Now you have a form open, right? So now you can start implementing your inputs. What we mean by inputs is the text area you see, the button you see, the things the users interact with to give you some sort of data or some sort of input. Okay. And we said HTML5 over here brought new input attributes, which are very helpful, like the email, the URL, the date, the time. It's the new input type. It's a type of input. And I'll explain that. So if I want to demonstrate that something, let's say if I say forms right now, I've created a form section. But when I come into I don't see anything like a form there. Okay. But when I insert an input, let's say a submit button, I say button is called, the type is a submit button. And it should show the word send details. Right? Once that is done, I have an input in here. So that's how we implement input. But I want to, what details am I submitting? Okay, so that's when I come and implement more input. Okay, that's when I come and implement more input. So at first, in previous HTML forms, the input button here is a self-closing tag. It doesn't have a closing tag to it. Okay, so at first you have your input button, and let's say you have text here. So I'm saying that the type of the input should be a text field. Okay, I can decide to have a name or not, and I'll explain why we have a name and why we don't have a name. The names are important because they help just like IDs, they help identify the input to labels. So when I give it a name of, let's say, any name at all, I say favorite name. I give it a name of favorite name. When I come to label it over here, we have a label saying input type is first name, right? First name. And with this first name, now I have a label, right, for this input. But I need to specify over here that for This label is for a specific input because I can have several inputs. I can have button here, I can have this here, I can have several inputs. So I need to specify the name over here, that favorite name. Okay. So that's how it comes out and we give a form input and name. So when I save this and I refresh, now I have your first name is this, your then send details. Now this is a very ugly form, to be frank with you. This is an ugly form, and HTML just by itself deals with the structure. Okay, so let's tidy up a little so that we can have a more clearer form. It deals just with the structure. Okay, it doesn't deal with any other business. Any other thing you talk about, say, oh, that's not my business, that's not my work. It deals mainly with the structure. And now we are creating the structure of a new form, right? These label and inputs are what we term as inline level elements. So inline level elements can stay on the same line. So if you want them to be on another line, you need to add a block level element, like let's say a div. Okay. So you can have a div here. You can have a div which controls the from it separates, it kind of separates it. Initially, you see the send details is just right behind. But when I put them in a div, what I'm saying is that because I have a division here, block out any other elements that is, it's going to push the button away from the other input element. So as you can see, I have my first name, I have this. Let's clean up the nav as well because we just want to focus on our, our header. So we don't have any image and any navigation there. We want to focus on our phone. Okay, so when I click this as well, it still looks very ugly. One of the things we can do is that we can have some CSS files here that are linked. Let me go check in my header if I've linked it to a CSS. So I've linked it to this CSS file, HTML5.css, which is found in my styles folder. So I can go to my Finder and fetch that particular folder, from, so this is my styles folder, and I have main.css. I can quickly, main.css here. No, I don't want main.css. I don't want main.css, so I'm going to grab the HTML5.css. That's what I want to. Initially, we did some styling for this. I want to implement basic styling for our form, okay? Because they look stuck together. So let's say I have an input called first name, which is of the type text. I have another input called last name, right? Which is also, it has to have a different name. So let me call this first name. I change this as first name as well. And I call this last name so that we can have them identified correctly. I change this as well, last name. Once I have this done, now I have two from the first name and the last, but they look very ugly. So what's your CSS stats is that you can use that to edit and then say, for every div that I've written on the page, give it margin. I'm going to do something. Don't worry. The top and the bottom should be 20 pixels, 20 pixels. Left and right should be 0. Okay. So now let's see what happens here. just with this CSS, we can see that it's separating things out for us just because I put them in a div. And I specify that our div should have that. And you can do a lot of things to your form, nice behaviors to your form. You can say, okay, well, your labels should be bold. Your label should have text, font, font style should be bold. Or they have a font width should be bold. Yeah. And now it makes them bold. And you can do some cool things with your input as well to give them some dimensions. And you can see your inputs. And these are just very basic CSS, which just to help us with the styling. You should have some sort of padding of 20 pixel or 10 pixel around them or 15 pixel or 10 pixel. Let's say 10 pixel. 10 pixel around them, and they should have a border radius. Border radius of, let's say, 20 pixel. Okay. So that's for the inputs you are. Let's see what happens to this input once we have the CSS now. So you can see a lot of styling. Your inputs, your buttons should also take that. I'm just like trying to demonstrate, and you should have box shadows set to none. I'm just trying to demonstrate how some of these things can be influenced with just some clicks. Now, we are having a better looking form, okay? Let's go back to our HTML and focus on our HTML, why we came here today. So I said we should strip off all other so that we're able to focus on our forms. Now we have this. What that means is that if I type in my first name, let's say Nana, and I type in my last name, it's going to submit the form when I click it, right? It submits the form when I click it. And there are lots of attributes, as you can see over here. The input has a type of text, okay? And the name, the input has a type of text and the name first name. We are going to focus on the input type. Okay? That's where our main business for today is going to reside. We are not going to focus on all other things, right? On the input type. Now we said that HTML5 brought some new input types. Okay, so apart from just text, which is over here, input type of text, you can have an input type of email, you can have an input type of URL, you can have an input type of date. And how that is helpful is that it helps you kind of validate the data that the user is giving you. So let's say text. If I say text, it means there are no boundaries whatsoever. A user can write anything at all in that field and it has to be accepted. So let me go and then say, maybe when I ask for their first name, they give me um, let me save this and then refresh so that we have only one field. If I ask for that person, they give me this. When I hit submit, that gets submitted. That is not what I want. I want to be sure that the data they are supplying to me is valid. So if I say, well, I'm taking an email from them, what HTML5 does is that if I specify this type to be an email, right, and I say they should supply me with their email address, and I come to this site and refresh. If they supply me with anything at all, you see, it validates it and then says, please enter an email. So by validation, I mean that the browser kind of checks if the data the user is supplying is correct. Okay. So now HTML5 brought in new types that has its own validation built into the browser that can check some of these things for you. But if I say, okay, well, Nana.233 is still is going to validate against it. It won't allow the user to submit it. But if I come and write a proper email like na@gmail.com, then when I hit send, it sends it away. Okay. Um, that is one thing. So initially we just had text. Okay. We had text, and that is what you used in your HTML. Then those times we used to write uh, a JavaScript that will do that validation for you. Okay. So if you don't know any JavaScript, it means that you are stuck. You have to write a JavaScript that does a validation. But HTML5 brought new input types like the URL, the date, the time, that allows the range, search, color, that allows you to validate the data they are giving to you. So if I say URL, if let's say I say this field is called, I want to type URL inputs there, and I come back here. Now it's expecting me to give it a URL, right? URL. I come back here into my browser. Let's save this first. I come back here into my browser. My browser here, and then refresh. And I write nana@gmail.com. When I hit submit, it says, please enter a URL. So HTML5 brought in specialized, let's say, input type that allows you to kind of ensure that the data the user is submitting to you is correct. Okay. So, but if I give it a URL like, let's say, HTTPS www.google or ug.edu.gh, which is the website for University of Ghana, then it's going to properly submit. Let's see what happens if I give it just UG. It says enter. So it knows that, well, a URL should begin with an HTTP or HTTPS. Okay. So it validates that against it. Okay. That is one thing that HTML5 brought. So there are several other like dates, like time, input types, like dates, like time. I'd like us to implement that and at least see how they behave. See how they behave. So this time we won't have any, our focus is not on the labels. Our focus is just on the input type, like I said, on the input types we have. Um, and we can have just the input type here, and it's going to implement as that input type. Okay. And let's look at this. We have the type set to URL. Now let's move to the next type. So the next input type is date and time, right? So let's get it to date and see what happens. We should have pop up this thing an input that allows us to select a date. Okay. So as you can see, the date is there. Once we click on, we can enter the month, let's say 07, which is July 23rd, and maybe 1999. Okay. And that is the date. It's been set to that particular date. When I hit enter, I submit. Or I can click on this icon and then go and specify, okay, 23rd, 22nd, and go and fetch my dates from there as well. And when I'm done, I can hit enter. So with this, the user is constrained to give you a date. Okay, it's constrained to give you a date. Another form of HTML code is time. Let's say time. Okay, the input type is time. So the user here can give you a time that's 2:30 p.m. They are constrained to give you a time, AM or PM, right? One of the input type that's not mentioned here, which I would like to make mention of, is date time local. So we have this here, date and time, right? You can combine the two for appointment purposes. That is, you want to set a date and you want to set a time. So previously we've set a time and previously we've set a date. Now there is one tool called date time local. Okay, that is not written on the slide, but I just wanted to mention it because so date time local allows you to select both dates and time at the same time. Okay, so you can select the date and the time for the appointment. Okay, so it's helpful to know that HTML5 brought all these implementations. You can have a number. A number kind of specifies the if let's say the person has an age or something that and you want to constrain him from writing. If you just use an ordinary input, remember they can write anything at all they want for you. Okay. So if I just use an ordinary input like I am expecting the age of the person here, and I say age or label, I say age here. What happens is that I've now given the user the chance to write anything at all. So if I come and say I want age, and the person can decide to write none of your business. And when they submit, your form will receive it. And your database will have none of your business. But to implement this, I can say number, right? What I'm doing is that I'm constraining the person to now enter a number. Okay, I'm constraining the person to now enter a number. And when I refresh, now you see you can't just write there for me, this for me. It says enter, please enter a number. Okay, you can't just write none of your business. The form wouldn't submit. Okay, the form it will constrain them to enter a number. And you can even with this, you can set attributes to specify the maximum number they have to pick from. Let's say you expect them to be between 18 and 45. You can see the number is 18, the maximum number is 45, and the minimum number should be 18. Okay. So once you specify these things and you come here, you refresh, now you can see that it constrains the user. They can't specify any other thing apart from that. So you can't say my age is 200 and try to hit enter. It will say, please select a value that is no more than 45. Okay, not more than 45. Okay, and if you can't select, let's say my age is 3 years old, it will say, please select a number that is not less than 18. So this is how HTML5 saved us from validation, like data traps. That is where users submit bad data to your database. And sometimes you have your database failing when actually they are giving you junk data. And you want to validate that. And HTML5 came with that blessing of being able to handle some of these things very well. And with a number, you can have a range as well. Let's see how the range is implemented. So a range, you can have a range here. The type is a range. And then with the range, let's see what happens. So now you see the range is more like a slider. Okay. You can say the minimum number should be 1, or let's say you want them to give you feedback, or let's say, how do you even say this? You want them to give you their review between 0 and 5. Okay. So you have 1 as the least, and 5, the maximum of 5 as the most. And you can implement what we call a step. A step is like in what stops do you want them to be? You want them to move from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the step is 1 in 1 step, or you want them to move in 2 steps. Then it means that when they drag the slider, it's going to move in 2 steps. Okay, they will move like 2, 4. That's way. So when I come back here, when I save this and I come back here, now my ATM, you see, when I drag it doesn't move freely, it moves in the steps, which are specified. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 1, 2. So that's the maximum is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So that's about the range, the input type range. And you can use it for volume controls. You can use it for several things. Several things. That is, if you want them to give you a rating, a user rating, let's say what they think about your product or your service, you can specify here that it should so rating 1 to 5. And you can implement a break here. And when I should do that, now I'm able to move between the stores. And when I'm done, I hit submit. Okay. So that's one of the blessings HTML5 came with. It's brought lots of options which you can choose from in terms of input types. You have the range, you have the search, you have color. So the other types I can leave you to experiment or find out. And it came with new attributes. Certain attributes are helpful because sometimes you want your form input to behave in a certain way, And we'll quickly go through some of these things. Placeholder is responsible for the text we shows before the user enters anything. Let's say we have email here, email address, and sometimes we choose not to display labels. We can say email here, and the placeholder can have a certain text which tells the user what to do in that input. Okay, so without this, if I haven't specified anything like a placeholder, when I come to this side, email doesn't have the properties of main steps, so let's get rid of that. Without this, when I come into my browser, let's see how it behaves. So we have this just for the email, right? I haven't written anything in there yet, just for the emails. Now, when I come and then implement a placeholder, and say, put some text in there and say, write your email. Then that text will appear before the user implements to give it information. So you see, it says write your email. Once I click in that field and I start to type, that text vanishes. If it's empty, the placeholder text holds the place, right? It holds the place. But if it's not empty, then the placeholder text gets away. So that's one thing HTML5 got. That's one attribute. However, with this, when I hit submit, it will the form will submit, even though that field is empty. So one of the attributes it also brought was required. Required doesn't have any value. When I say required, it means that that form, that part, this input needs to be filled before this form can be submitted. Unlike initially when it got submitted with an empty space. So when I hit, I haven't refreshed. Let me refresh here. When I hit now, it's telling me to fill out this field. It means it's a required field. Okay, it's a required field. And we see that here. So placeholder text is there, required field is there, autofocus is there. I'll explain what autofocus means that once the form loads, focus on that area. So I'll explain what browser focus is. Initially, let's look at this. When I reload my, you see, nothing is in focus. It means when I start typing, it's not going anywhere, right? But if I add autofocus as an attribute to autofocus as an attribute to my inputs type, what's going to happen is we are going to have it automatically focusing on that input when the browser loads. So when I hit refresh, you see automatically. So when I start typing, I don't have to come and then click that area before the focus kicks in. Okay. So that's one thing when you add autofocus to it. When you add autofocus, automatically the that field will be in focus when the browser loads. Okay. Without the autofocus, let's see. Without the autofocus, nothing is in focus. When I add the autofocus and say now we have something in focus. Okay. We have something in focus. And that is how actually it works. Okay. That's how actually works. So new attributes. By attributes, we mean that the input type can have certain properties added to it. We have autofocus. Pattern is for what we call, you see, sometimes you want to constrain the user on the format of data they present, the format of data they present. And this can be in the form of an address, this can be in the form of a phone number, this can be in the form of, you want to constrain them, okay? You want to constrain them. And that's when you introduce patterns. And we'll get more into it when we talk about regular expression. Okay, so you can implement a regular expression in a pattern. Okay, and that helps you. In our video, in the upcoming lessons, I'll share more details on how to use the pattern. Okay, pattern. You set the pattern to an attribute using regular expression. So the pattern is also an attribute that can be written in the form of pattern, and then it accepts a value. Okay, and you can use enter a regular expression here. A regular, what we mean by a regular expression is an expression or a code that kind of constrains the user on how to input certain things. Okay, so that's about the pattern. And there is also autocomplete. Autocomplete is also there. You can give it a value that it should fill a certain, so let's say auto complete with something. Okay, if I give it some text like write your email and I say autocomplete is Jane at UG edu.eth. If I come and I hit, once I start writing Jane.edu, it should be able to pick that up for my autocomplete forms. Okay. So that's about some of the blessings HTML5 brought with forms to improve forms. Compared to the other versions of HTML, you have new input types, such as the email, the URL, the date, the number, range, search, color, and new attributes which you can add to improve your forms. So that's one of the things that they brought. Now let's talk about offline and storage capabilities. This has become increasingly important because sometimes you want browser to be able to retain some data which you will use from time to time. And we need that feature for apps a lot. Okay. When they give you some data, you want to be able to hold the data. So the first thing is we talk about web storage. Okay. HTML5 allows web apps to hold data, sometimes even offline. Okay. Local storage. Local storage is for storing data persistently on your hard drive so that even after the browser has been closed, you have data that has been saved at a certain portion of your hard drive. And when you restart the browser, you can get that data back. And that's important because sometimes you are browsing or you are running a script, and then because of the web page, your browser crashes or there is an issue. When the browser stops or it crashes, you can't afford to lose all the data. So if the data has implemented, if your web page has implemented local storage, then it means that the data will be saved at a certain portion of your hard drive and it can be recovered the next time the browser is restarted. Okay. And we say that it stores data persistently after the browser restarts. Okay. And the storage limit 5 to 10 megabytes, approximately 5 to 10 megabytes per domain. Per domain means, oh, Google has its 5 to 10 megabytes. University of Ghana has its 5 to 10 megabytes. CNN.com has its 5 to 10 megabytes. Any other domain you visit can have that implemented, provided they have local storage. And this code is written in JavaScript. And you can implement that on your JavaScript so that your website is able to save persistently in case there are crashes. Session storage is just for the current section. So that means that if you close the tab, then it means that that code is gone. Okay, that code is gone. You close the tab, and it means that that data is gone. So if you and it's useful for temporary data that you don't need to or you don't intend to use it over and over again. The next one is index database or index DB. This is a low level NoSQL. When we talk about NoSQL is like you see in databases there are two types of data. There is structured data and unstructured data. Structured data come in the form of rows and columns. So you can have the data having first name, last name, emails, stuff. Unstructured data don't come organized. They don't come in the form of the, what do I say, names and columns. So you can have images coming in, you can have music files coming in, you can have, all of these are sorts of data, but they don't come structured like rows and columns. So structured data, we hold structured data using SQL, okay, for structured data. NoSQL is for unstructured data, okay. So IndexedDB is a low-level NoSQL database that is implemented by HTML5 for storing large amounts of structured, unstructured data. It supports transactions, it supports asynchronous operations, non-blocking as well. This is an example of how to implement it in JavaScript. Okay, so you can have this code in your JavaScript. That's That's an example. Again, I'll say that this course is not for JavaScript, so I don't want us to spend a lot of time in JavaScript. But for example purposes, you can later on experiment. That is, if you have an interest in JavaScript. And we'll move on to the third thing that HTML5 implements, the third form of storage that it implements. We have app cache, application cache, and service workers. Now, application cache is deprecated. So now 7 workers are being used. Okay? Application cache is a low-level NoSQL. I explained what NoSQL is, a database for storing large amounts of structured data, but it's deprecated. Now we have, let's say, service workers. Service workers, you have a script running in the background which enables offline caching. When we say offline caching, it means that pages that are visited by the browser are being recorded or are being stored so that images or resources are not repeatedly downloaded. So if you go to a website and you requested for it logo, you requested for him banner, the next time you are going there, it's saved in your cache. Or the first time you went there, it's saved in your cache. So the next time you are going there, it doesn't need to go and then request for all those details again. It's already existing locally in your cache, and the browser can make use of it without having to place other ATP requests again for that same resource. Okay, so that's about offline caching. Push notifications too are very useful for apps. That's if you are maybe browsing a page and then you see a notification that, okay, you have a new message, or you have this, or you have that. That's a script running in the background doing that, and it's called a service worker. And background synchronization to help. And like I said, this is in JavaScript, okay? So you can go check it out and implement it and see how it functions, okay? And the other thing HTML5 also brought was better performance and connectivity, okay? It helps your site to perform better and connect to other resources faster. And I spoke about web workers. Okay, let's look at what web workers do. They allow multi-threading in the background. Okay, they allow multi-threading in the background. Okay, so this is very useful because sometimes you have you need things to start processing in the background before the user actually gets into doing stuff. So you can implement some of this JavaScript to see how, and multi-threading helps the UI. It prevents it from freezing. The UI is like a user interface. Okay. So this is very helpful in, let's say, HTML5. Okay. The previous versions of HTML didn't have this actually. So some of these things are important to make mention because HTML5 brought these implementations, and even though they seem quite technical, it's important to have a fair knowledge of them. Many times you might not even implement this. You might not implement this yourself because you might be working with a framework that does this thing for you. Okay? So you don't need to cram this code and then have it in mind to be able to. But when the framework implements it, you need to understand, oh, what's going on. Okay. So this is an example of how a web worker works. Okay. And remember, the purpose of the web worker is to help you get better performance. That is multi-threading in the background. You have several scripts running in the background without any freezing. Okay. And you also have WebSockets. WebSockets are real-time, bi-directional. Bi-directional communication means that several directions of communication. And these are for bi-directional means two, actually. And these are for chat apps and live updates where we have the user sending some input to the server and the server responding back. So you can have this JavaScript as well doing that for WebSockets, which was implemented by HTML5. That helps with the communication as well. And server sent events, SSEs, are unidirectional. They are one way. They are one way. They trigger in one direction. So the previous one, WebSockets, are two-way for chat app. With the server side, you have it going in one direction. Okay, so it's used to push updates to the client. So you have updates being sent directly to the client, and the client is not giving feedback, so it's not a two-way. So WebSockets work in a two-way. The client is giving feedback, and updates are being pushed to the server, the client. Okay, so for example, you have stock tires, you have newsfeed. All of these are WebSocket implementations. Then, like I said, you can read more on some of these things if you want to get into the technicalities. But I wanted you to understand that initially, before HTML5, we didn't have some of these things. We didn't have WebSockets, we didn't have server sense. So most of these things were implemented um, by JavaScript somewhere. You will have to figure things out, and then write code that specializes in doing that. Now, most of these things have been built with the implementation of HTML5. So the moment you declare your document in your doc type, that, oh, doc type HTML, it means that you are now implementing some of these things automatically. You expect your browser to be able to catch on with some of these implementations. That's what you are telling the browser to do. All right. So there is also one thing, geolocation APIs. Okay, and it helps with let's say today we have a lot of apps that are delivery apps that needs location, weather apps, ride sharing apps like Uber, like Bolt. All of these apps use geolocation, geographical location of the user, and other users as well that want to deliver to the user. So this API was implemented mainly in HTML5. And since 2014, that has been helpful. And you can implement the data. The main data sources is that it uses the GPS. You can use the GPS, the most accurate, but it's battery intensive. Wi-Fi networks can also give you some sort of data that you can use to do that. Cellular towers are for mobile phones. So MTN, Vodafone, they have cellular towers around which you can use to communicate when it comes to some of these geolocation. And IP geolocation is the least accurate, but it's a fallback of one. Okay. So you use the object in JavaScript, geolocation navigator.geolocation in JavaScript. Okay. And this is not a JavaScript class, so I don't want us to spend a lot of time on JavaScript. I want us to talk about what HTML is doing. And I need you to understand that these implementations have been made possible with HTML5. Okay. And this is an example of how to implement the object geolocation using the key methods. We call these methods in JavaScript because they've already been built in there. You just have to call that function. So when you call the function get current position, which is already built in JavaScript for you this way. So you have navigator.geolocation.get current position. Then the success callback, the error callback, and the options you want to implement. Okay, this is an example of how it's done. So here you have the position. That's if it sucks, it should get the position. If it's successful, it will get it. If there's an error, it should show this error message, right? And the options you want to enable high current, high accuracy, true. Timeout should be 5,000. Usually this is in milliseconds. Okay. Milliseconds, so you have 5 seconds. So optional high current accuracy. So like I said, it's not for us to get so much in JavaScript, but I want us to see a demo of how at least some of these functions are implemented. And with the geolocation thing, it allows you to kind of use your apps, HTML5 apps, to talk to the users, get their position. So this is for getting the user's position, current position, right? Watching the current position is like monitoring where the user is moving. After you've gotten the position, if the user is moving from one place to other, you can still monitor it. And so continuously tracks the user's position. Useful for device navigation apps, okay, like Google Maps. So this is how it's implemented. Constant, create a constant and then watch ID and navigator, then set it to that. And we see a similar implementation. Get the position, and then the error should be this. Okay. And this is JavaScript actually. And like I said, it's not a JavaScript class, so I don't want us to go too much into JavaScript. And clear watch is for clearing an active watch position. So if you are watching someone and you need to clear, because the more you watch, the more data that is gathered, and it can slow down things. So you can just implement your navigator.geolocation.clear watch, and you implement the ID, and then it clears the watch. Okay. So basically, I wanted you to get a grasp of some of the things that is possible. Now we have geolocation being implemented, and it increases the possibilities for a lot of things like apps that can use locations and other things. So if you require the location of your users with permission, you should get their permission first. So the browser will ask them, google.com or Google Maps is trying to get your location. Should I allow it? Let me see if, let's say if I go to maps.google.com, it will try to get my location there. Perhaps I've visited it, so for the first time, it's not getting my location. I've visited earlier, so maybe for the first time, it's not trying to get my. It knows I'm in Accra, okay? So it's kind of doing some caching, okay? But if it's your first time, it will try to get your location to implement certain things, okay? Um, so that's about the geolocation API. So you can see that with HTML5, web storage is increased, like how it handles data has been improved, how it handles forms have been improved, location, how it handles location issues have been improved, plus several other things. Okay, so let's finally make a comparison, okay, between the older versions of the HTML, the HTML4 and the XHTML with the HTML5, the new improvement. So with the doc type, at first, the doc type was very long and complex, like we saw, okay, in our earlier videos. So we had doc types looking like these, which were very long and complex. Now it's been very simplified. So we have a very simplified version, long and complex. This is very simplified. News media, multimedia, you needed Flash, you needed to install Flash on your server to play videos, to do certain things that are scripted. And now Adobe Flash is out of the way. It implemented HTML5 audio and video tags, which we demonstrated earlier, which are relatively even simpler to implement compared to the script used to write for the earlier versions of HTML. Now, better semantics, okay, mostly which were, initially they were div based, like they were divs. You use divs to do almost everything and then give it an ID, and sometimes you select the ID and give it certain properties. Okay. Now we have a header tag, an article tag, a footer tag, a navigation tag, an aside tag, which really a section tag, which really helps browsers to understand what is happening on the page, and it helps search engines to also index your page properly. Okay. And for the user of the developer, it's more user friendly compared to the text that we had. And then forms, it brought basic input. I had only basic input like text and phone and telephone, that's all. But HTML5 brought a lot more useful forms that came with their own validation. So sometimes they constrain and then ensure that the user gets you the right data, which is helpful for your database. And the storage, at first it was the use of cookies only. Now we have local storage, we have index VP, we have section storage. Okay. Mm. Section storage, section storage works more like um, cookies. Okay. Local storage is able to store data persistently on your hard drive. So even when your browser shuts down, you can still get things recovered. Okay. And with the graphics, at first, we're using Flash plugins, Adobe Flash, to do every graphics animations. But now with Canvas, you can draw even using JavaScript. Okay. I implemented SVG codes, and you can even animate the SVG codes, and you can have logos that are vector graphics. Vector graphics do not, when you stretch out, their quality is maintained. They don't increase, and it's useful for logos as well. So most SVGs nowadays are implemented in the form most logos are implemented in the form of logos. And with the connectivity, initially before HTML5, it was polling based. Okay. Now we have WebSockets and we have SSEs. Okay. WebSockets for they are what do I say? Bi-directional. So you have two-way chats. You have things being pushed to the client and the client pushing things to the server. But this one, SSEs, you have things is a unidirectional way. You have things being pushed to the, the client on like updates. So when you compare HTML5 to the older versions of HTML, you can see it's a great improvement. In our next class, we'll get into what goes into the head tags, okay, what goes into the body tags, and we'll see more of HTML5 as we go along. I wish you all the